had the privilege to speak at my old church that I grew up in as a child, where, as most of you already know, but if you don't, I'll go ahead and tell you before someone else does, that they refer to me as Little Archie. I am not Little Archie at Grace Point. I'm only Little Archie at Reedy Branch. But anyway, I'm so glad to have this opportunity to speak this morning. And I hope that the message that I have to share is inspiring. I hope that it does for you what it's done in my own life. I don't know, a lot of you probably know this about me, but if you don't, just a little secret is that I really love Christmas. Have since I was a child. I love Christmas. If Carla would let me, my tree would be up already because it's September, and why not enjoy it for the last 4 months of the year? I don't know what the problem is. But I really love Christmas. Christmas is a big deal to me, and it always has been, and I was the first person that I knew as a child that had 2 Christmas trees in their house because I aggravated my mama to death until she allowed me to do it. But for a few years of my life, if you knew me back then, before I came here, I worked in a store that at Christmas we transformed the whole place, and that's what we did for a living was put up people's Christmas trees and all that kind of stuff and decorate homes. And that was a fun season of my life. But when God called me here, he put me in a whole different place. And that was not really part of what I was doing anymore. I was able to decorate here and decorate at home and those kinds of things, but to go into people's homes was not something that I was able to do anymore. But I'll never forget that first fall, it was near Thanksgiving week, that I was here at Grace Point full time, that I got a phone call from a lady, and she asked me, could she hire me to come put up her Christmas tree? And first of all, it's hard for me to say no to anything, but especially somebody wanting to put up a Christmas tree in November is hard. But this lady had a little different story. This lady had just got the news that her child had a brain tumor. And it was a little different need of putting up a Christmas tree. You see, her hope was that they would come home from work and school on that Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and the house would have the Christmas tree up, and they would have just a moment to enjoy it. I'll never forget that I hung up the phone, and I couldn't say no to her, but in my mind, there was no way I was going to be able to meet that over the next couple days. There just wasn't enough time in the day, and I was like, I could do it in the middle of the night, but the children are going to be there sleeping, and they're going to know it's going to happen. It's not going to be a surprise. And I can remember thinking, like, in my mind, how in the world am I going to do this? I cannot tell this lady no. She just wants to have the Christmas tree up so they can enjoy it before they go back to the doctors for testing, and who knows what the next steps are. And so what I did next was a pivotal moment in my life when I came to the realization that, you know what, I could not do that by myself. It was something that I couldn't do by myself. So I got on the phone and I called the person that I think loves Christmas the next most bustle. And I said, Amy, I know you love Christmas. Listen, I have this project. I can't do it by myself. I need your help. Amy said, yes, I'll do it. When are we doing it? How are we doing it? And so over the next 48 hours, we saw the most incredible thing happen that really blew my mind. The next thing I knew is that on the day we were supposed to put up on that tree, on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I'll never forget, all these people showed up at this house. Owners from businesses showed up with new Christmas decorations. In the matter of hours, we went into this home of this lady who just wanted a Christmas tree up. And I'm telling you, if it stood still, we put Christmas on it. Why not? But in the matter of a few hours, not only did we put up her Christmas, and not only did we cut fresh greenery from the yard and make everything all awesome for Christmas, a truckload of gifts showed up. Someone had went to the school and talked to the children and asked them what they wanted most at that moment. And the tree was filled with gifts. The next thing we know is someone stepped up and said, you know what, when they come home, I'm going to have dinner. It's going to be sitting on the table. It's going to be hot, and it's going to be ready. And so we watched this beautiful picture unfold of the fact that, you know what, no, I couldn't do it. But the fact of it is that we could do more together. And a whole team of people was able to do something that was really incredible, something that was very simple and something that really a lot of us do on our own as we put up our Christmas tree. But at that moment in her life, I don't think she could find the energy in her to put up that Christmas tree, but yet she wanted her kids to have that memory because she didn't know what the future held for her. And we were able to do that because we decided to lock arms together and do something together. And we were able to do something far more than put up a Christmas tree that day. Another time I think about of a moment when I've learned another lesson about doing something together, it was we were standing in Haiti. It was our very first year of serving there in 2016, and it was on Monday, July 4th. I'll never, ever forget it in all my life. We were walking out of this village that we had just been in, and we had done dental work all day and shared the gospel with so many people and give a lot of people medicine, and a lot of people just prayer and hope and encouragement and all this kind of stuff. And we were walking out of this village, and a dear friend of mine said, dude, we need to take a picture together. And, you know, dudes don't usually do that. Girls do, but dudes don't. But he said, we need to take a picture right here together because this is a huge moment. When I look at that picture today, and I wish I would have had it put up here for you, I look at that picture today. It's me and Chad Fussell, and we're standing on this little path outside the village of Jijiwa. There's a mountain, an amazing mountain in the background. And it's almost this postcard moment. But the picture to me is more than that experience of us being in a village together for a day. It's more than us going to Haiti across the sea to do something. The picture to me was that day we accomplished so much more than if either I or him went there alone. You see, I couldn't bring hope to a people who had pain in their mouth. I couldn't see about a tooth that was not well and that was broken, but he could. But he also, could he have shared the gospel with the people? Absolutely. But his job needed to be to fix, to meet a physical need at the moment. And he needed other people to come together to share the gospel with those people so that they would not only have hope because their problem was fixed, but they would also have hope in Jesus because Jesus is the only hope we have. And in that moment, in that picture, when I see it from time to time when it shows up in different places, I think about, you know what, that day, there was a group of us, there was probably about 15 of us, that we had locked arms together. We went into a village not knowing what to expect, not knowing what we were going to do. But we did something incredible because we decided to do it together. I'm sure every one of you have a story like that. You have a story of a moment in this community or in your life where, like, maybe there was a challenge that was before you. Maybe there was something big that you were facing and you thought, how am I going to be able to do anything about this? And maybe you shared your problem or shared your concern or shared your wish with someone nearest to you and that person decided to lock arms together to do something about the problem that was in existence. I've had the honor and the privilege to watch Grace Point do this many, many times as a church. It's been awesome to sit back and watch and many times get to be in the trenches with you when you did this. But even before I came here, I got the privilege to watch you guys lock arms time and time again as a church and go and meet and do something about the brokenness in our community. I'll never forget my very first 7 baskets and how many thousands of pounds of food. I wasn't even a part of this church. I was just there as a community person. How many thousands of pounds of food that I watched us give out that day. And not a single person could have ever done that on their own. But because you decided to lock arms together, you were able to do so much more together. Last Christmas, back to Christmas, if y'all can't tell, I've already had a Christmas tree candle burning in my office. I'm ready for Christmas. Last Christmas, we had the joy of watching little community parties pop up all over our community. It was this idea that, you know what, we believe that we could really change someone's life by celebrating them or by hosting a party for them. And it was a really cool moment where we kind of put out this idea, like, we were like, hey guys, there's a lot of people in our town that deserve a party. And we want to throw parties for these people. And a party can be really just food, gathering together, fellowship, whatever you want it to be. We're letting you be creative about this, but we want you to go find someone who's deserving of a party because we think that people are worth celebrating. God celebrates us, and people are worth celebrating. And so we watched this incredible picture unfold all around our community, and there was probably 20-something parties that happened in all kind of different places on all kind of different nights. And it was because the church decided that, you know what, there are people worth celebrating, and there are people that need to know that they are valued and they are worth something. And so people begin to look at those people in their vicinity and their little area, and they begin to host parties of all kinds. There was parties for children. There was parties for adults. There was parties for senior adults. There were parties for schools. There were parties for people in hotels. There were parties everywhere. And for just a moment, everybody was able to take their mind off of what was going on in their life, and they were able to just enjoy a moment in time. Because people decided that they could do more together. And we watched people from this church go to their schools, and then their whole school jump on board to host these parties for all kinds of things, and it was an incredible moment when people decided that we could do more together. I think that when you and I do something together, when we lock arms and decide to do something together, that we have the potential to affect how a generation sees God. I want to kind of land on that for just a minute with us this morning. I truly believe that with all my heart. I believe that when we as the church, when we lock arms together and we decide to do something together, it has the potential to change how a whole generation sees God. And you say, well, how does that work? I don't understand. Well, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but you and I live in, I think, one of the greatest communities in America. I love Coffee County. But the sad part of me is when I look around Coffee County, there's so much that is broken. There's so many people who are just over the church and they don't want to be a part of the church anymore. And they don't want to, they're tired of hearing about a God who's so good when they're not seeing him do anything around them or seeing his people do anything around them. We live in a community that is broken. And I think that if we as the church want to change how they view God and how they view the church, then you and I have got to lock arms and do something about the brokenness in our community. We've got to decide that, you know what, that the problems that are in our community today are not just their problems, the people out there that's living in them. They're not just my problem, but they're our problem. And we as the church are going to do something about it. This morning I'm going to talk about the story of Nehemiah, and it's a really awesome story that many of us are very familiar with the story of Nehemiah. We've heard that story over and over and over again, but I think that Nehemiah has so much he wants to teach us about doing stuff together and what the impact it can have on people. You see, the town of Jerusalem, it was in ruins. The community was struggling. The people were facing a crisis of their faith, and there was a generation that was losing hope in the God of their parents and their grandparents. I just imagine in that community there was probably a 13-year-old boy or a 10-year-old boy or whoever you imagine in your mind that had heard all these stories from their grandparents and their parents about how good God was and how great God was, and yet they were standing there in the middle of their city and the place was in ruins and it was broken. The walls were broken down. The gates had been burned. And I can imagine him standing there thinking like, I am over this. If God is so good, then why is this happening around me? If God is so great, then why is our city falling down around us? Mom, why do you keep saying God is good? Look around us. Grandparents, why do you think that God has done all these great things or was good? I don't get it. And he was probably, I just imagine in my mind, he was about ready to say, you know what, I'm not going to the synagogue anymore. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm just going to go do my own thing. Because what you're saying, I don't see it to be true anymore. They lived in a community that was broken. There was this moment when a messenger showed up to Nehemiah. Nehemiah was out serving the king. He was no longer there. And the messenger showed up in Nehemiah 1:3, and it says, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jericho is broken down, and the gates have been burned with fire. You see, there was a messenger that day that showed up. There was a messenger that showed up to Nehemiah, and I believe that the story here is teaching us that the messenger showed up to name what was broken. You and I live in a community. We live in a community that has some things that are broken. We live in a community that has all kinds of addictions and people who are hungry and people who are without homes and people who need hope in Jesus. But yet, so many times we're sitting and we're doing nothing about it because we are too afraid to name what is broken in our community. And if we're ever going to make a difference in the community around us, if we're ever going to change how a generation views God, if we're ever going to change how that lost person on the street sees God, then you and I have to start by naming what is broken in our community. We have to name what's broken. I believe that this was a wake-up call for Nehemiah. It was a wake-up call when the messenger showed up to where he was and said, hey, I just need to tell you this. And in the beginning, Nehemiah didn't just jump into action. At first, he kind of mourned and he fasted and he prayed about what was going on. Nehemiah mourned what was broken because it had been named. It had been listed. What was going on had been verbally spoken to him, and he mourned over that. And then he began to fast about what should I do, and he began to pray. But Nehemiah didn't wait long, which I love about Nehemiah. He was a go-getter. I believe that you and I, we probably, some of us, maybe some of us don't. We have an idea what's wrong in our community, but maybe we're afraid to say what it is. Maybe we know of a situation right now that is broken, that's somewhere near our house, that's near our street or in our school or in our office or where we work. We know something that is broken, but we're too afraid to name what is broken because we're afraid of the challenge that's going to come with us or come to us to have to fix it. But we need a wake-up call. We need a wake-up call to what is broken around us so that we can begin to allow God to use us to fix it. I fully believe this, that we as the church, if we ignore the problems that are happening in our community, then you and I forfeit our right to have influence in our community. I believe that we as the church, if we ignore the problems, if we ignore what is broken, then you and I forfeit the right to have an influence on the community. We don't have influence in our community because our thinking is right. We have influence in our community because of how we serve our community. And if we ignore what is broken and we can continue to ignore that, then we forfeit our right to have an influence on them. Why are they going to listen to us talk about a God who is good if we don't go give them food when they're hungry? Why are they going to listen to us that say that God is good and God can deliver you from all this thing when we're going to leave them laying in a hotel? Why is a teenager going to listen to us that we have hope in a Jesus who sits on his throne, who is full of grace and mercy, if we don't ever go spend time with that teenager? Where they are broken at, where they're at. If we ignore the problems in our community, if we ignore what is broken, we forfeit our influence with the people around us. We have kids in our public schools that go home hungry day after day after day. I know many of you who have done something about that, but you know what? There needs to be more. There needs to be more people who will say, you know what? I can't let a child go home hungry anymore. I'm not going to allow that to happen. We have hundreds of children who are in foster care, and we have very few families. And so when these children are taken from their homes, taken from what they know as their safety, as their place of being, and they're shipped out to other communities. They can't even stay in their schools. They can't even stay with their friends. We have a community that is broken. We have a community that needs to see that we're not just talking about a Jesus is good, but we're living like we believe in a Jesus that is good. We have a community that is plagued with depression and drug use. We have a community that's broken. You know, the thing Nehemiah didn't do was he didn't ignore what was happening. He didn't ignore what was broken. He didn't excuse it. He didn't sit back and wait for someone else to do something. Nehemiah moved quickly when he heard that the walls were broken, that the gates had been burned, and he moved quickly into action to go and do something about it in his city. At the end of chapter 1, though, Nehemiah says something that I think is great. It's a very simple statement, but it's something that I think he was trying to teach us here. And he says, I was cupbearer to the king. I was cupbearer to the king. And I think what Nehemiah here is saying, and I may be wrong, but I really do, I believe what he's telling us, is Nehemiah was telling us who he was not in this statement. He was saying, I'm not a priest, I'm not a spiritual leader. My only job is basically to keep the king happy. That's my job. I was cupbearer to the king. But he also was saying, you know what? But I have a special privilege. See, I have a special privilege that I'm willing to use because I am cupbearer to the king. And I will use the privilege I have to do something about the brokenness. I think that if you and I are going to affect how a generation sees God, I think we're going to have to be like Nehemiah, and we're going to have to leverage whatever we have. We're going to have to leverage our influences. We're going to have to leverage our resources. We're going to have to leverage our privileges. We're going to have to leverage our knowledge. We're going to have to leverage our pocketbooks to do something that is about what is broken in our community. We're going to have to be like Nehemiah. We're going to have to use what we have to serve the people around us. If we're going to change how they view God, if we're going to change how they view church, then we're going to have to leverage our privileges to do something about what's broken here in our community. Nehemiah risked everything because people are worth it. I think that if I asked you guys to raise your hands this morning and I said, hey guys, who wants a better community? I think we would all raise our hands. And if you wouldn't, let's talk after church because I want to know why you wouldn't raise your hands. But I think that also we would say, you know, yeah, I want a better community. I want kids to have a great start. I want teenagers to have an adult that'll show up in their life time and time again and tell them who Jesus is and tell them how much they're loved. I want someone to do something about poverty. I want to, you know, not have kids in foster care, and I want to help in all these ways as long as it doesn't cost me much. As long as I don't have to give up too much. As long as I don't have to get very uncomfortable about it. As long as really I could just maybe poke a check at it and go on about my business. then I want us to have a better community. But I think that if you and I want to influence and have an effect on a generation and how they see God, then we've got to leverage whatever we have, and then we also have to go see for ourselves what's going on in our community. See, I think the easy part of us as Christians is that we are blessed because we live in America and we're here today, and so that means that for the most part, we live way better than the rest of the world. And so it's really easy for us to strike a check and give it to someone else to go do something about what is broken in our community. But there are times when we, as the people of the church, we have to go see what's broken. We have to go see for ourselves. Nehemiah got the news that things were broken down in Jerusalem. And Nehemiah didn't send a messenger back and go say, hey, will you go see what's broken? No, Nehemiah decided to go back. And he had to ride around that city, and he had to look at the walls, and he had to see what was broken and come up with a plan. And if you and I are going to leverage if we're going to leverage whatever we have to affect how a generation sees God, then you and I have got to go to the front lines, and we've got to go see for ourselves what's broken here. I think the more of us that get close to the brokenness, the more impact we have on the brokenness. What if we as the church got close enough to people of different views? What if we as the church got close enough to people of a different color? What if we as the church got close enough to foster kids? What if we as the church got close to that annoying middle schooler? What if we as the church decided to get close enough to the drug addict or the prostitute standing down on the street? I believe with all my heart that if we got close enough, that we would be so bothered that we would do something about the brokenness in our community. I believe that if we as the church would get out of our comfortable seats and go and see what is broken in our community, then we would be bothered enough that we wouldn't sleep at night until something was done about the brokenness in our community. We are the church. God has called us to share his love with the world. How will they ever have a different view of God if we keep it inside these walls and we never go see where they are and where they're living in the slums and in the hotels and all those kinds of things? If we never go see what is broken, how are we going to fix what is broken? So if we're going to change how a generation sees God, then we've got to go see for ourselves. I believe if we're not willing to get close, if we're not willing to go see for ourselves, then we're going to lose a community and we're going to lose our kids. We're going to lose a generation because they are tired of hearing about how good God is, and they want to see how good God is. I love Nehemiah's visionary speech. I think he must have been my brother because people just go do it. This is the problem, go do it. It's really short and sweet, and you see it in Nehemiah 2:17, and he says, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. And then in verse 18, it says, they replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. Now, the thing I love about this is the volunteers that were there that day. There were perfume makers and jewelry makers and preachers and politicians and merchants, people who were selling that. There wasn't like they called in Charles Lewis Construction and they came and built the wall back for them. It was just everyday people who showed up. I mean, even a cupbearer was there building a wall back. There were no experts there to build the walls back. The people just saw what was broken. Nehemiah said, listen, if we're going to change this, then we got to go do something about it. And they said, let's go. Let's go do it. This is what's broken. This is what needs to be fixed. Let's just go do it. And that's what the people did. I think that if you and I are going to change how a generation sees God, then sometimes we have to do something that we don't know how to do. That's what people were doing that day. They were doing something that they didn't know how to do. They decided that, you know what, we are broken because our city is broken. We are unsafe and our children are unsafe, and we want to do something about it. I love the story because so many people just did whatever they needed to do to make it happen. I don't believe that Nehemiah said, wait a minute, guys, before we go build this wall, let me give you a spiritual gifts test because I want to see how gifted you are. I want to make sure you're working in your calling. No, Nehemiah is saying, listen, there is something that is broken and it must be fixed, and you must go with me and let's fix this. I don't believe that there was any classes to teach them how to rebuild the wall. I believe that they just locked arms with each other and they got out there and they started building just the best way they could. They didn't wait. They just went to work. People were in danger. Evil was outside the gates. Children were at risk. God's reputation with a whole generation was on the line. And everybody that Nehemiah needed to rebuild the city was already in the city. Everybody that Nehemiah needed to rebuild the city were already in the city. People, we are in a city that is broken. We are in a city that has brokenness all around. We are in a city that has issues all around. We are in a community. That's where we are because we live in a broken world. But there is no doubt in my mind that we don't need missionaries to come. God already has in this city the people that are needed to rebuild the city because we're here. He didn't place us here by happenstance or by accident. He placed us here for a reason. And if we want our city to be a better place and we want to do something and we want to change how a generation sees God, then we got to get up and rebuild our city, and we got to fix what is broken with the help of the Holy Spirit. The people are already here. The people are here. The city needs to be rebuilt, and the people are already here. At one point, about halfway through the construction, as you read on through his story, people begin to, things kind of unravel, things go south, people are tired, they're ill, they're grumpy. If you don't know how that looks on when you're doing a project, then just go on a mission trip with some people when it's hot, and it happens real fast. But the people were tired, things began to pile up, the morale and the attitude begins to shift, the enemy's outside the gates staring in their face, and the people begin to panic. And this is one of my favorite things that Nehemiah does. It was a genius idea. We see it in chapter 4 and verse 13 and 14, and he says, "Therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families." I posted these people by families, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, "Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters and your wives and your homes." Nehemiah decides that, you know what, things are going south. People are getting tired. People need to be reminded what we're doing this for. And people rallies the families, and he says, "You know what, Dad? I'm putting you on this wall to protect this city and to continue to rebuild, and you're going to keep the enemy away. And I'm going to put your family there with you because that's who you need to be reminded that you are fighting for." Dads, in this room today, we live in a city that is broken. We live in a city that has drug addiction rampant throughout the city. We've heard just a story that God has delivered someone from, and it started with prescription drugs. They're giving them out every day. And we have more and more people addicted to these things. It is time that we quit sitting and watching college football and get off our rear ends and do something, because we are fighting for our family. We're not just fighting for a city. We're fighting for our sons and our daughters and our wives and our homes. We have a city that is broken. And if they are never going to change their view of who Jesus is unless we as men of the church stand up and do what God has called us to do, we got to fight for our families. If we're going to fix what is broken, if we're going to change how a generation views our God, who we believe is great, then we've got to fight for our families. We're not fighting for their safety. I think we're fighting for how they see God. We're not just fighting for their safety. We're not just fighting so that they have a great house to live in and all those things. Those things are nice, but that's not what we're fighting for. We're fighting for how our sons and our daughters view Jesus and who Jesus is and what they believe about him. We're fighting how a generation will see the church and believe what the church believes and know if it's true. Parents and grandparents, we must stand in the gaps and fight for our families. People who serve children in any way, teachers, doctors, whoever you are, the people that God is placing in your life, you're fighting for how they view God. You're fighting for much more than just a city that's broken. I think another thing we have to remember is that we got to keep working together regardless, even when we're tired, even when the enemy is right outside the gates, even when things are staring us down and we don't think that it's possible for us to do anything about it. We've got to keep fighting regardless. I think we make much more of an impact when we work together to confront what needs to be rebuilt in our cities and in our communities, in our homes. I think the people were expecting God in Jerusalem that day to show up and do another miracle to fix what was broken. I believe that they were sitting back thinking, like, God's going to do something. He's going to just send this miraculous miracle and the walls are going to stand back up and all these kind of things. Is God capable of that? Yes, God is capable of anything. But that's not what God chose to do that day. God decided that, you know what, He was going to surprise them with themselves and what he was going to do through them and how they were going to rebuild the city. Once the walls were rebuilt, there were several things that happened, but one of them was that the people outside the walls, the skeptics, they changed what they believed about God. Nehemiah 6:16 says, when all of our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of God. Church, if we want to surprise the people outside the walls of here, if we want to surprise the people who are skeptical about who this God is that we worship and who we serve, then let's lock arms and do something together. And it will change what they think and our reputation. It will change who they believe we are and what they think we're about. I think another thing that happened was those inside the wall changed how they listened to God. Nehemiah 8:3, Ezra the priest, he opened the scriptures and he read it aloud from daybreak till noon as he faced the square before the water gate in the presence of men, women, and others who could understand. And all the people listened attentively to the book of the law. Now, I don't know about you, but that is a long Sunday school class. Daybreak till noon. I'm not signing up for that D group. But the people were attentive because it changed how they listened to God after they saw what God did through them together. And they weren't bothered, and they weren't looking at their clock to see where we got to be next and what we got to do next. They weren't worried about all those kinds of things because what had happened in their city through them, because they decided to lock arms and do something together, changed how they listened to God. I think because of what they did together, it changed how they saw God. I believe also what they did together changed how a generation worshiped God. From the days of Joshua, son of Nun, until that day, the Israelites had not celebrated it like this, and their joy was very great. What the people had done together changed how a generation worshiped God. You see, for years, they had not celebrated in the way they were celebrating that day. But because the people decided to lock arms together, it changed how they worshiped God. Some of my favorite moments of church, and I guess we shouldn't have more favorites than others because we have a church that preaches the word, and so every Sunday should be our favorite. But some of my favorite ones is those Sundays after we have finished something like camp or a 7 baskets or a project that we've decided to put our minds together and work together. There's something sweeter on those days. I don't know if it's a holy exhaustion because we're tired and our hearts are tender or what, but when you come into service after those days, there's just a different spirit. As people begin to sing, they sing a little louder because they've been working together in unison to do something that not a single one of us could complete on our own. I'll never forget that the Sunday after Summer Jobs this year, God did an incredible thing this year. We had 5 days of camp. We saw 200 campers. We were able to tell 200 campers about the hope that we believe in Jesus and that they can live fully alive because Jesus is alive. And there were 70-plus people that had wore orange shirts that week and served these kids. It was this crazy, crazy thing. I remember that Sunday as we sat in this building and we looked across and we saw this sea of orange. I'll never forget the Summer Jobs worship team. They did some of their music. Blake and the band did some of their music. And I just remember, even after being so exhausted, even after many had not slept for days because they had been sleeping in the cabins with children, the songs were a little louder. There was a little bit more passion in what had happened. And I truly believe it was because the church had locked arms together that week and did something that not a single one of us could do alone. You see, one of us, if I picked one of you out of the crowd and said, okay, I want you to go host camp for 200 people, and I want you to go tell 200 kids about the hope in Jesus this week. Also, while they're there, can you feed them and play some games? Not a single one of us could do that. But when we as the church lock arms together, we can do something about that. And I believe it makes our worship sweeter. It changes how we worship the one who we created. So for you this morning, you're maybe thinking well, okay, so we know stuff that is broken. Every one of us has a different set of eyes on our community. Every one of us live on a different street. Some of us have the joy of living on the same street, but you get my point. We're all in a different neck of the woods, but we're all in the same community. Every one of us has a different set of eyes to see what is broken right around us. And so what do we do with this? How do we become a Nehemiah? How do we become someone who's going to stand up and go do something about what is broken? I think the first thing that we have to do is we got to name what's broken. Every one of you, if I got you to take out a piece of paper today and write it down and leave it in your seat, every one of you in here, some of you would have some of the same things. I do believe that because God's putting those things on our hearts about what is broken. But I believe every one of us in our circle of influences, we see different things that are broken. You don't see those things for no reason. So I think the first place that we got to start, if we're going to be Nehemiahs and we're going to do more together, then the first thing we got to do is we got to name what's broken. I think also then we got to start doing stuff that we don't know how to do sometimes. We got to start doing things that we don't know how to do sometimes. I believe that God equips who he calls to do something. And I believe that sometimes we have to quit trying to figure it out on our own and get ready to go do something, and then God will show us how to do it. And so I think that if we're going to be people who's going to change how a generation sees God, then we've got to go do something that we don't know how to do. I think that also we've got to leverage whatever we have. Whatever influence, whatever power, whatever person that we know that can help us. We've got to leverage whatever we have for the sake of a generation and how they see God. We've also got to get up close and personal with the problems. Because how is a generation ever going to listen to us? How are they ever going to believe us if we have no interest in what's really going on in their life? If we haven't went to the front lines to go see what is going on? I think that we also have to decide to keep working together no matter what. I don't know if any of you have ever led a group of people to do something. I'm sure a lot of you have. And I don't know if any of you have ever like you're leading this group and you have this grand idea of this is what needs to be done, this is the project, this is what's got to be finished, this is what's got to be completed. And then all of a sudden somebody has a different way of doing it. And you get your feathers ruffled and all this kind of stuff. And you're mad because they didn't do it the way you wanted them to do it. Well, the end result is did it get completed? Then it doesn't matter how they did it, if they did it your way or not. The fact of it is that we've got a broken city around us, and we can't think of petty things like that. And we got to go do whatever we got to do to get it done. We got to work with people who are difficult. We got to work with people that aren't easy to work with. We got to go and do things. If we're going to change how this generation sees God, we got to go do things and work together no matter what. No matter what. I think how we work together can change how a generation sees God. I truly believe that. I think that we as the church, how we work together can change how a generation sees God and views God and experiences God. And church, the challenge is to us is, are we going to work together? Are we going to do something about what is broken in our city? Are we going to lock arms with each other and go and drive out darkness and teach people that dead hearts can be brought to life? And prove to people that the God that we speak of and the God that we talk about and the God that we say that we believe in, that he is the one who will drive us to go and do things that are hard and go and do something about what is broken. Are we willing to go and do something about what is broken so that a generation will change how they see God? Will we do that today? Will we be that church? Will we be those people? Will we be those believers who are willing to get out of our seats, to leave this building, and to go to the front lines of what is broken in this community and do something about it? Dads, are you willing to get up and go fight for your families? To drive out darkness in this city? Granddads, grandmoms, grandmothers, are you willing to get up off your seat today and go do whatever it takes so that the next generation will change how they view God? This morning we're going to give you a next step. And it's a little different than how we normally end things here at Grace Point, but I think it's important. Maybe you've been inspired by the story of Nehemiah and you're like, I'd like to be a little more like him. I'd like to get up and do it, but I don't know how to do it. Well, I already told you, go do something you don't know how to do. But see, we at Grace Point, we want to help you do that. We want to know what your passion is. We want to know what breaks your heart. And we want to help you go and do whatever we can to help you go and fix what is broken in the area that God's calling you to go fix it. This morning, you probably noticed some tables on the outside of the room this morning, and the band's going to come up in just a few minutes, and they're going to play a song. While that song's playing, we want to encourage you to head to one of those tables. It's called a We Can Do More Together card. And it's really a volunteer card. And there's a lot of really open areas that cover a lot of things, and they're not all on the screen, so don't freak out and think like, oh, there's only preschool, middle school, elementary, high school. We got even more than that on there. But did you know that right now, the amount of kids that God has placed in our care at Grace Point Church, that we don't have enough volunteers to serve every one of them and change how they see God? Do you know that almost every single Sunday we have to go and beg someone who's already serving somewhere else to move locations on a schedule because we believe it's important that those little boogers back there get to see a view of God and it be a good view of God, and we don't have enough people to do that? Did you know that every single week that Chris Sheffield stands before a group of teenagers that he is praying over and that he is studying how he can teach them and how he can do whatever he has to do to teach them and change their view of who God is? And that he don't have enough people to just say yes to hanging out with those people, to just say, yes, I'll show up in that teenager's life over and over and over again, even if they get on my nerves. We just heard an incredible story from Celebrate Recovery. Happens every Tuesday night in this church. You want to fix something that's broken? Why don't you show up here one Tuesday night? Somebody will tell you what to do. Somebody will walk you through how you can serve in that area. Our church is great at this. We serve a lot in our community. But guess what? When the days come to the organization and the planning of all that kind of stuff and the packing of the trailers and all those kinds of things, there's just not enough people here to get it all done. We can, myself and Chris and Blake and Clay and others, I probably forgot some, that are on staff here, we can't do this alone. We can't fix what's broken in our city by ourselves. We need you to say, you know what, today I will stand up and I will go to the front lines and I will go see what is broken and I will do something about it. This fall we have a couple different opportunities. One of them is my favorite because all we're asking you to do is come have dinner. You're like, what? Come have dinner? We're not asking you to come to share the gospel with people. We're just asking you to come sit down at a table with some strangers. This October, every Wednesday night, we're doing something called Tables. We're going to show up in a different community every single Wednesday night. We're going to have some chicken and some drinks. We need you to bring the sides in your body and a voice to talk and sit down and have dinner with somebody you don't know. Because we fully believe that if we're going to find out what's broken in our community, what's broken in the places that we don't live, then we need to go to our community. And so we're inviting people that's not part of our church. And believe it or not, we're not even advertising that our church is hosting tables. So if you tell them that we're hosting tables, you're a liar. It is a community effort. We don't even want them to know that it's our church. Because we want to know what's broken in our community. We want to know what breaks our neighbor's heart. We want to know what they're facing right now. Because if we're going to do anything about it, then how are we going to do anything about it if we can't name what's broken? Another opportunity we have is there's tons of people in our community who need something as simple as a wheelchair ramp to get in and out of their house. And there's just not enough resources for it to happen. And so in November this year, we're going to be doing another community mission project called Next Door. And that's what we're going to do. We're just going to go next door and fix something that's broken, fix something that needs to happen. And in hopes of that time that someone's going to see that, wait, the church did this? Why would you do that? And we're going to tell them it's because of what Jesus did for us. And that's what he's called us to do, is to fix what's broken in our community and to do something about the brokenness around us. We also have a hospitality ministry around here. And you're like, hospitality? I don't have hospitality. Can you smile? Can you shake hands? Then you have hospitality. That's another area that's on this card this morning. And there's all kinds of things that happen in that. But we also believe that if we ever go to our community and see what's broken and we go invite a broken person to come to this church, that when they walk through those front doors, that we want them to have an experience that they're going to want to come back to. So we need people that are willing to say, you know what, I will get up early on Sunday morning and I will come and I will greet somebody at the door. I'll open the door or help them from their car to the church or fix some coffee for them because we know we all need coffee. Caffeine and Jesus gets us through the day. Also, the worship ministry, people who stand on the stage and lead worship. They need helpers. They need people who will feed them. They need other people who will join them. They need people back there in the tech booth that'll say, yes, I can click a button on a computer and make these things happen on the screen. There's a whole team of people needed if we're going to fix what's broken in our city. And so this morning, our challenge to you is that during this song or sometime before you leave today, that you'll go to one of these tables, you'll grab one of these cards, and all you got to do is check a couple boxes, put your name and email and phone number on there. We've got, if you're real brave, we've got tubs on the stage this morning that we'd love for you to drop your card in. If you're a little more like, I don't really want Chris to see me do this because then he's going to be on my back tomorrow. You can drop it in the buckets by the doors as you go out. You know, if you're just that kind of like slide it and keep walking person. That's cool. We're cool with that. We don't care. And here's what's going to happen. Here's what you can expect when you fill out this card, that one of us is going to call and we're going to say, okay, so what do you think is broken that needs to be fixed? How can we do this together? How can we fix what is broken together? How can we serve children like they matter? How can we show up in their lives over and over again? How can we show up in the teenagers' lives of our church to change their view of who God is? How can we go to our community and we serve these people in a way that's going to change how they view our Jesus? How are we going to do that? And we're going to walk with you through that. We're not just going to throw you out and say, go do it on your own. Good luck. We're going to be the Nehemiahs if we need to be and cheer you along and remind you like, hey, listen, you're fighting for your family. That's why we're doing what we're doing. So it's that easy this morning. As the band comes up right after I pray, we want you to step out and go grab a card. Simply fill it out. Drop it in one of the buckets. That's all the work you have to do at this point. Someone else is going to take it from there. Someone else is going to give you the charge orders, the marching orders for what needs to be done next. Someone's going to contact you and tell you, hey, these are the next steps. You don't have to do this alone. We have a city that is broken, but we have the people to fix it right here. We can do more together. God, thank you